Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory, and I am a part of Varietal Literature. And Varietal Literature is a group of writers from Vancouver who just like to have fun with narrative. And the way that we'll have fun with narrative tonight is by reading stories about solitary Irish spirits, including leprechauns. GS already in the chat. If you don't know, we have a live chat going. If you're watching this live, there's a live chat. If not, you can always leave comments and I'll address them in the following week. Also, if you've never been here before, you should know that if you're not watching this live, down in the description below will be timestamps for each of the stories we read. And we're going to read stories about 3 different things today. The first one obviously being about leprechauns. So if you're looking for that one and you're not watching this live, you can click on the timestamp and go straight to that story if that's all that interests you. The second one is a completely different spirit, although Yeats, who I'll talk about in a minute, does seem to think that leprechauns and Darrig are related spirits in different moods. I don't know. I'm just, Yeats is the one who put more thought into this. And then finally we're going to talk about a thing called a Pooka, which is probably, according to Yeats, and I kind of agree with him here, somehow the influence for Shakespeare to write a Puck, because it's a very similar creature to Puck, and obviously Pook and Puck have a very similar sounding name. So I think he might be onto something there. So we're going to read about 3 different creatures. What they have in common is twofold. They are both solitary fairies and spirits, and they are all in Irish lore. Now, with that said, we've read from Yeats's book here, Fairy and Folktales of the Irish Peasantry, a few times before. I think it's probably one of the best books I've read, period, because it is these beautiful, rich, old stories that Yeats takes very seriously, but also it is reinterpreted with his wonderful sense of prose and pacing and language, so they're really beautifully rendered. But we've only ever read about fairies that travel in groups. Sort of communal living fairies, which are also called the good people, the little people, things like that. And that came in the form of Irish spirits and fairies, but also in Cornish spirits and fairies. Piskies were something we've talked about twice now, once quite recently, but they also travel in groups. These are about spirits that are loners, basically. So that's our theme tonight. Obviously, leprechaun lore is a part of that, but we won't just be talking about leprechauns. I will briefly talk about another type called Banshee at the very end. There's a reason why I'm not reading the story associated with it. It's my own limitations, but I will at least talk about them a little bit, just to round out everything that Yeats talks about in this section of the book. Hey, look. Early spam. Good. No, that's right. Spam me now. because if I get spam now, I can deal with it before I'm trying to focus on reading. There we go. Okay. So, that's the principle. If you're looking for timestamps to skip ahead, you don't want the explanations, you just want the stories, and you're not watching this live, skip to the Leprechaun story, skip to the Darrig story, or skip to the Pooka story, or you can even skip to a little explanation of what a Banshee is. But for us, we are going to start, for people live and people that are interested, we're going to start by reading Yeats's introduction to this section, because I think it's quite interesting and answers a lot of questions about leprechauns and so on right off the bat. So this isn't really a story, and normally I just read stories, but I do find Yeats's descriptions quite entertaining. Now, if you don't know, this book is written by W.B. Yeats, which is perhaps the most famous Irish poet that has ever lived. I'm sure there's some controversy in that, but I don't think that there's much. And Yeats was, to my understanding, a pagan, and for him, this was a work of science and history. So I think there's something quite beautiful in that, because he takes it very seriously. These are his descriptions of tales that he collected from Irish peasantry, as he called it, not my words, at the turn of the century in this very seminal book, Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry. So I'm going to read you first. It's a short section where this is Yeats talking about the solitary fairies, and it'll give us a bit of an introduction to what is a leprechaun in Irish culture and some of these related spirits. The solitary fairies, Leprechaun, Cluricaun, and Darrig. The name Leprechaun, Mr. Douglas Hyde writes to me being W.B. Yeats, is from the Irish leaf brog, i.e. the one shoemaker, since he is generally seen working at a single shoe. So in other words, leprechaun means one shoemaker. It is spelt in Irish leithbrogan or leithfrogan, and is in some places pronounced Leprechaun, as O'Kearney writes in that very rare book, Fieth Tai Conan, which is a very old historical work that was unearthed and then put into print about a Conan tribe in a Proto-Ireland. Okay, so right off the bat, if you're curious where the name leprechaun comes from, it comes from a word that means the one shoemaker, because they're traditionally seen making one shoe. The Leprechaun, Cluricaun, and Darrig are these one spirit in different moods and shapes? Hardly two Irish writers are agreed. In many things, these three fairies, if three, resemble each other. They are withered, old, and solitary, in every way unlike the sociable spirits of the first sections, which is the section we've read in other areas, if you're curious. They dress with all unfairy homeliness, and are indeed most sluttish, slouching, jeering, mischievous phantoms. They are the great practical jokers among the good people. The good people doesn't really speak to them being good people. The good people is the slang way of referring to little spirit people in Ireland, and actually in Cornish, because Cornish is related to Celtic culture as well. The leprechaun makes shoes continually and has grown very rich. Many treasure crocks buried of old in wartime has he now for his own. In the early part of this century, according to Croker, in a newspaper office in Tipperary, pardon me, they used to show a little shoe forgotten by a leprechaun. The Cluricaun, and I'm not going to try and pronounce, I did look up how to pronounce it in the more traditional way, and I couldn't do it. Makes himself drunk in gentlemen's cellars, which we're going to read a story about. Some suppose he is merely the leprechaun on a spree. He is almost unknown in Connaught and the north. The Darrig, or Fyrdirg, which means the red man, for he wears a red cap and coat, busies himself with practical joking, especially with gruesome joking. This he does and nothing else. And the man of hunger. is an emaciated phantom that goes through the land in famine time, begging an alms and bringing good luck to the giver. We won't be reading a story about that. There are other solitary fairies, such as the house spirit and the water shiri, own brother to the English jack-o'-lantern, the Pooka, and the Banshee. As concerning these presently, the Dalahan, or headless phantom, one used to stand in a Sligo street on dark nights till lately. The black dog, a form of perhaps of the Puca. The black dog is interesting because the black dog comes up in a lot of cultures, but we haven't really read about it on this channel. The ships at the Sligo Keys are haunted sometimes by this spirit, who announces his presence by a sound like flinging all the tin porringers in the world down into the hold. In other words, a great clattering noise. He even follows them to sea. The Linhan Shi, our fairy mistress, seeks the love of mortals. If they refuse, she must be their slave. If they consent, they are hers, and can only escape by finding another to take their place. The fairy lives on their life, and they waste away. Death is no escape from her. So in other words, it's a version of succubus. Which is a spirit that does the same thing, just from different cultures. She is the Gaelic muse, for she gives inspiration to those she persecutes. The Gaelic poets die young, for she is restless and will not let them remain long on earth, the malignant phantom. GS says, wow, I had no idea about all of these. Several dark and scary ones. Yeah, I think I'll talk more about, like, why do they have the moods and dispositions they do. Okay, so... oh yeah. Besides these, there are diver monsters. The Off Iska, the water horse, the Piast Bestia, the lake dragon, and such like. Whether these be animals, fairies, or spirits, I know not. So, we're not going to read stories about all of those. We're going to start with a story that is about the Cluricaun. So it says here, just to repeat, it's a creature or a spirit that makes itself drunk in gentlemen's cellars. Some suppose he is merely the leprechaun on a spree, and we'll kind of take his view of that here, because I think it is an interesting one. So that story about that is called Master and Man by collected from T. Crofton Croker. By W.B. Yeats in Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry. Billy McDaniel was once as likely a young man as ever shook his brogue at a patron. Emptied a quart and handled a shilling, fearing for nothing but the want of drink. Caring for nothing but who should pay for it, and thinking of nothing but how to make fun over it. Drunk or sober, a word and a blow was ever the way with Billy McDaniel. And a mighty easy way it was of either getting into or of ending a dispute. More is the pity, though, the means of his thinking and fearing and caring for nothing. This same Billy McDaniel fell into bad company, for surely the good people are the worst of all company anyone could come across. It so happened that Billy was going home one clear frosty night, not long after Christmas. The moon was round and bright, but although it was as fine a night as a heart could wish for, he felt pinched with cold. "By my word," chattered Billy, "a drop of good liquor would be no bad thing to keep a man's soul from freezing in him, and I wish I had a full measure of the best." "Never wish it twice, Billy," said a little man in a three-cornered hat, bound all about with gold lace, with great silver buckles in his shoe, so big that it was a wonder how he could carry them. And he held out a glass as big as himself, filled with as good a liquor as ever eye looked on or lip tasted. "Success, my little fellow," said Billy McDaniel, nothing daunted, though. Well, he knew the little man to belong to the good people. Again, that's fairy people that you should be cautious of, is the point he's making. "Here's your health, anyways, and thank you kindly, no matter who pays for the drink." And he took the glass and drained it to the very bottom without ever taking a second breath to it. "Success," said the little man, "and you're heartily welcome, Billy. but don't think to cheat me as you have done others. Out with your purse and pay me like a gentleman." "Is it I pay you?" said Billy. "Could I not just take you up and put you in my pocket as easily as a blackberry?" "Billy McDaniel," said the little man, getting very angry, "you shall be my servant for 7 years and a day, and that is the way I will be paid, so make ready to follow me." When Billy heard this, he began to be very sorry for having used such bold words towards the little man, and he felt himself, yet could not tell how, obliged to follow the little man the livelong night about the country, up and down, and over hedge and ditch, and through bog and brake, without any rest. When morning began to dawn, the little man turned round to him and said, "You may now go home, Billy, but on your peril don't fail to meet me in the fort field tonight. And if you do, it may be the worse for you in the long run. If I find you a good servant, you'll find me an indulgent master." Home went Billy McDaniel, and though he was tired and weary enough, never a wink of sleep could he get for thinking of the little man. But he was not afraid to do his bidding, so up he got in the evening, and away he went to the fort field. He was not long there before the little man came towards him and said, "Billy, I want you to go on a journey tonight, so saddle one of my horses, and you may saddle one for yourself, as you are to go along with me, and you may be tired after your walk last night." Billy thought this very considerate of his master, and thanked him accordingly. "But," said he, "if I may be so bold, sir, I would ask which is the way to your stable, for never thing do I see but the fort here, and the old thorn tree in the corner of the field, and the stream running at the bottom of the hill with a bit of bog over against us." "Ask no questions, Billy," said the little man, "but go over to that bit of bog and bring me 2 of the strongest rushes you can find." Billy did accordingly, wondering what the little man would be at, and he picked 2 of the stoutest rushes he could find, with a little bunch of brown blossoms stuck at the side of each, and brought them back to his master. "Get up, Billy," said the little man, taking one of the rushes from him and striking across it. "Where shall I get up, please your honour?" said Billy. "Why, upon horseback, like me, to be sure," said the little man. "Is it me after making a fool of me you'd be?" said Billy. "Bid me to get on a horseback upon a bit of a rush? Maybe you want to persuade me that the rush I pulled but a while ago out of the bog over there is a horse?" Up, and no words," said the little man, looking very angry. "The best horse you ever rode was but a fool to it." So Billy, thinking all this was in joke, but fearing to vex his master, straddled across the rush, which is just grass, in case you haven't put that together. "Baram, baram, baram!" cried the little man 3 times, which, this is a note from Yeats, which in English means to become great. And Billy did the same after him. Presently the rushes swelled up into fine horses, and away they went full speed. But Billy, who had put the rush between his legs, without much minding how he did it, found himself sitting on horseback the wrong way, which was rather awkward, with his face to the horse's tail, and so quickly had his steed started off with him that he had no power to turn around, and there was therefore nothing for it but to hold on by the tail. At last they came to their journey's end and stopped at the gate of a fine house. "Now, Billy," said the little man, do as you see me do, and follow me close. But as you did not know your horse's head from his tail, mind that your own head does not spin round till you can't tell whether you are standing on it or on your heels. For remember that old liquor, though able to make a cat speak, can make a damn man dumb." The little man then said some queer kind of words, out of which Billy could make no meaning, but he contrived to say them after him for all that, and in both they went through the keyhole of the door, through one keyhole after another, until they got into the wine cellar, which was well stored with all kinds of wine. The little man fell to drinking as hard as he could, and Billy, no way disliking the example, did the same. "The best of masters are you, surely," said Billy to him, "no matter who is the next, and well pleased will I be with your service if you continue to give me plenty to drink." "I've made no bargain with you," said the little man, "and will make none. but up and follow me." And away they went, through keyhole after keyhole, and each mounting upon the rush, which he left at the hall door, scampered off, kicking the clouds before them like snowballs, as soon as the words, "Baram, baram, baram," had passed their lips. When they came back to the fort field, the little man dismissed Billy, bidding him to be there the next night at the same hour. Thus did they go on, night after night, shaping their course one night here and another night there, sometimes north and sometimes east and sometimes south, until there was not a gentleman's wine cellar in all Ireland they had not visited. And I could tell the flavour of every wine in it as well, aye, better than the butler himself. One night when Billy McDaniel met the little man as usual in the fort field, and was going to the bog to fetch the horses for their journey, his master said to him, "Billy, I shall want another horse tonight, for maybe we may bring back more company than we take." So Billy, who now knew better than to question any order given to him by his master, brought a third rush, much wondering who it might be that would travel back in their company, and whether he was about to have a fellow servant. "If I have," thought Billy, "he shall go and fetch horses from the bog every night, for I don't see why I am not, every inch of me, as good a gentleman as my master." Well, away they went, Billy leading the third horse, and never stopped until they came to the snug farmer's house in the county Limerick, close under the old castle of Carriguneel, that was built, they say, by the great Brian Boru. Within the house there was great carousing going forward, and the little man stopped outside for some time to listen, and then turning round all of a sudden said, "Billy, I'll be 1,000 years old tomorrow." "God bless us, sir," said Billy. "Will ya?" "Don't say these words again, Billy," said the little old man, "or you'll be my ruin forever. Now, Billy, as I'll be married 1,000 years tomorrow, I think it is full time for me to get married." "I think so too, without any kind of doubt at all," said Billy, "if ever you mean to marry." "Ah, and to that purpose," said the little man, "have I come all the way to Carriguneel, for in the house this very night is young Darby Riley, going to be married to Bridget Rooney, and as she is a tall, comely girl, and has come of decent people, I think of marrying her myself and taking her off with me." "And what will Darby Riley say to that?" said Billy. "Silence," said the little man, putting on a mighty severe look. "I did not bring you here with me to ask questions." And without holding further argument, he began saying queer words which had the power of passing him through the keyhole as free as air, and which Billy thought himself mighty clever to be able to say after him. In they both went, and for the better viewing the company, the little man perched himself up as nimbly as a cock sparrow upon one of the big beams, which went across the house over all their heads, and Billy did the same upon another facing him. But not being much accustomed to roosting in such a place, his legs hung down as untidy as may be, and it was quite clear he had not taken pattern after the way in which the little man had bundled himself up together. If the little man had been a tailor all his life, he could not have sat more contentedly upon his haunches. There they were, both master and man, looking down upon the fun that was going forward, and under them were the priest and piper being like bagpipes. The father of Darby Riley, and Darby's two brothers, and his uncle's son. And there were both the father and the mother of Bridget Rooney, and proud enough the old couple were that night of their daughter, as good a right they had, and her 4 sisters, with brand new ribbons in their caps, and her 3 brothers, all looking as clean and as clever as any 3 boys in Munster. And there were uncles and aunts and gossips and cousins enough besides to make a full house of it, and plenty was there to eat and drink on the table for every one of them, if they had been double the number. Now it happened just as Mrs. Rooney had helped his reverence to first cut off the pig's head, which was placed before her, beautifully bolstered up with white savoys, that the bride gave a sneeze, which made everyone at the table start. But Not a soul said, "God bless us," all thinking that the priest would have done so, as he ought if he had done his duty. No one wished to take the words out of his mouth, which unfortunately was preoccupied with pigs' heads and greens. And after a moment's pause, the fun and merriment of the bridal feast went on without the pious benediction. Of this circumstance, both Billy and his master were no inattentive spectators from their exalted stations. "Ha!" exclaimed the little man, throwing one leg from under him with a joyous flourish. His eyes twinkled with a strange light, whilst his eyebrows became elevated into the curvature of Gothic arches. "Ha!" said he, leering down at the bride and then up at Billy. "I have half of her now, surely. Let her sneeze but twice more, and she is mine, in spite of a priest, mass book, and Darby Riley." Again the fair Bridget sneezed, but it was so gently and she blushed so much that few except the little man took, or seemed to take, any notice, and no one thought of saying, "God bless us." Billy all this time regarded the poor girl with a most rueful expression of countenance, for he could not help thinking what a terrible thing it was for a nice young girl of 19, with large blue eyes and transparent skin and dimpled cheeks, suffused with health and joy, to be obliged to marry an ugly little bit of man who was 1,000 years old, barring a day. At this critical moment, the bride gave a third sneeze, and Billy roared out with all his might, "God save us!" Whether this exclamation resulted from his soliloquy or from the mere force of habit, he never could tell exactly himself. But no sooner was it uttered than the little man, his face glowing with rage and disappointment, sprung from the beam on which he had perched himself, and shrieking out in the shrill voice of a cracked bagpipe, "I discharge you from my service, Billy McDaniel! Take that for your wages!" gave poor Billy a most furious kick in the back, which sent his unfortunate servant sprawling upon his face and hands right in the middle of the supper table. If Billy was astonished, how much more so was everyone of the company into which he was thrown with so little ceremony. But when they heard his story, Father Cooney laid down his knife and fork and married the young couple out of hand with all speed, and Billy McDaniel danced at the rinka at their wedding. danced the rinka at their wedding, and plenty he did drink at it too, which was what he thought more of than dancing. Pardon me. So that's a story of, as far as Yeats as the calculation goes, potentially a different spirit than a leprechaun, but he really thinks it's the same spirit as a leprechaun, just in its more alcoholic phase. And I can get it. It's a small little man with buckles on his shoes. Some messages from GS. Do other countries have alcoholic fairies? That's a good question. I haven't really encountered. There's lots of fairies that will steal your food. So there must be. Maybe the groundskeepers invented fairies to cover for their unauthorized nipping. There might be something to that, right? Uh-oh, no grace was said at the feast, and no God bless for sneezing. Yeah. GS picked up on it right away, what the problems were. Okay, so there's a tale about a leprechaun, potentially. Just to sort of round out our leprechaun thing, I am going to read a little rhyme about a leprechaun, a little poem. And then we will move on to... I believe the Pooka is where we're going next. Okay, so this is the Leprechaun or Fairy Shoemaker, William Allingham, a poem about leprechauns. Which again means the one shoemaker. Woo! Got real big. Let's get that back down to normal. There we go. Little cowboy, what have you heard up on the lonely Rath's Green Mountain? Only the plaintive yellow birds sighing in sultry fields around. Chari, chari, chee. Only the grasshopper and the bee. Tip-tap, rip-rap, tick-a-tack too. Scarlet leather sewn together, this will make a shoe. Left, right, pull it tight. Summer days are warm. underground in winter, laughing at the storm. Lay your ear close to the hill. Do you not catch the tiny clamor, busy click of an elfin hammer, voice of a leprechaun singing shrill as he merrily plies his trade? He's a span and a quarter in height. Get him in sight, hold him tight, and you're a made man. You watch your cattle on the summer day, sup on potatoes, sleep in the hay. How would you like to roll in your carriage, look for a duchess' daughter in marriage? Seize the shoemaker, then you may. Big boots a-huntin', sandals in the hall, white for a wedding feast, pink for a ball. This way, that way, so we make a shoe, getting rich every stitch, tic-tac-too. 99 treasure crocks this keen miser fairy hath, hidden mountains, woods, and rocks, rune and round tower, cave and rath, and where the cormorants build, from times of old, guarded by him, each of them filled full to the brim with gold. I caught him at work one day, myself, in the castle ditch where foxglove grows, a wrinkled, wizened, and bearded elf, spectacles stuck on his pointed nose, silver buckles to his hose, leather apron, shoe in his lap, rip-rap, tip-tap, tic-tac-too, a grasshopper on my cap, away the moth flew. Buskins for a fairy prince, brogues for his son, pay me well, when the job is done. The rogue was mine beyond a doubt. I stared at him, he stared at me. Servant, sir, humph, says he, and pulled a snuff box out. Took a long pinch, looked better pleased. The queer little leprechaun offered the box with a whimsical grace. Poof! He flung the dust in my face, and well I sneezed, was gone. If you're not familiar with some forms of Irish poetry, the kind of sounds and onomatopoeia is a really crucial part of certain regions' poetry in Ireland. Okay. GS says, "Aw, he saved the bride." Yes, he did. That's from the first story. Okay, so those are the ones that are about leprechauns fairly clearly. The first one is technically a different type of thing. The Cluricaun, I think it was called, which is the one that runs around in your wine cellars and drinks everything, which might just be a guy hiding the fact that he gets up in the middle of the night and drinks, or maybe Yeats is right. It's a real spirit. Now, this third type of spirit is one that Yeats theorizes is the same thing as a leprechaun, just in a different mood, as he puts it. I don't know if I agree with him on that, but it is an interesting spirit. This is the Darrig in Donegal. The spirit is the Darrig. So, Darrig in Donegal, collected from Miss Letitia McClintock. Pat Diver, the tinker, was a man well accustomed to a wandering life and to strange shelters. He'd shared the beggar's blanket in smoky cabins. He crouched beside the still in many a nook and corner where poteen was made on the wild Inishowen mountains. He'd even slept on the bare heather or on the ditch with no roof over him but the vault of heaven. Yet were all his nights of adventure tame and commonplace when compared with one especial night. During the day preceding that night, he had mended all the kettles and saucepans in Moville and Greencastle, and was on his way to Caldaff, when night overtook him on a lonely mountain road. He knocked at one door after another, asking for a night's lodging, while he jingled the halfpence in his pocket, but was everywhere refused. Where was the boasted hospitality of Inishowen, which he'd never before known to fail? It was of no use to be able to pay when the people seemed churlish. Thus thinking, he made his way towards a light a little further on, knocked at the cabin door. An old man and woman were seated, one at each side of the fire. "Will you please to give me a night's lodging, sir?" said Pat respectfully. "Can I tell you a story?" returned the old man. Sorry, can you tell a story? "No, then, sir, I cannot say I am good at storytelling," replied the puzzled tinkerer. "Then you mun go just gang farther, for none but them can tell a story we'll get in here." This reply was made in so decided a tone that Pat did not attempt to repeat his appeal, but turned away reluctantly to resume his weary journey. "A story indeed," muttered he. "Old wives' fables to please the weans." Old fake stories to please the children. As he took up his bundle of tinkering implements, he observed a barn standing rather behind the dwelling house, and aided by the rising moon, he made his way towards it. It was a clean, roomy barn, with a piled-up heap of straw in one corner. Here was a shelter not to be despised, so Pat crept under the straw and was soon asleep. He could not have slept very long when he was awakened by the tramp of feet, and peeping cautiously through a crevice in his straw covering, he saw 4 immensely tall men enter the barn, dragging a body which they threw roughly upon the floor. They next lighted a fire in the middle of the barn, and fastened the corpse by the feet with a great rope to a beam in the roof. One of them then began to turn it slowly before the fire. "Come on," said he, addressing a gigantic fellow, the tallest of the 4. "I'm tired. You'll be taking your turn." "Faix and troth, I'll no turn 'em," replied the old big man. "There's Pat Driver in under the straw. Why wouldn't he take his turn?" With hideous clamor, the 4 men called the wretched Pat, who, seeing there was no escape, thought it was his wisest plan to come forth as he was bidden. "Now, Pat," said they, "you'll turn this corpse, but if you let him burn, you'll be tied up here and roasted in his place." Pat's hair stood on end, and the cold perspiration poured from his forehead, but there was nothing for it but to perform his dreadful task. Seeing him fairly embarked in it, the tall men went away. Soon, however, the flames rose so high as to singe the rope, and the corpse fell with a great thud upon the fire, scattering the ashes and embers, and extracting a howl of anguish from the miserable cook, who rushed to the door and ran for his life. He ran on till he was ready to drop with fatigue, when seeing a drain overgrown with tall rank grass, he thought he would creep in there and lie hidden till morning. But he was not many minutes in the drain before he heard the heavy tramping again, and the 4 men came up with their burden, which they laid down at the edge of the drain. "I'm tired," said one to the giant. "It's your turn to carry him a piece now." "Faith and troth, I'll carry him. But there's Pat Driver in the drain. Why wouldn't he come out and take his turn?" "Come out, Pat! Come out!" roared all the men, and Pat, almost dead with fright, crept out. He staggered on under the weight of the corpse until he reached the Kiltown Abbey, a ruin festooned with ivy, where the brown owl hooted all night long, and the forgotten dead slept round the walls under dense matted tangles of brambles and benweed. No one ever buried there now, but Pat's tall companions turned into the wild graveyard and began digging a grave. Pat, seeing them thus engaged, thought he might once more try to escape, and he climbed up the hawthorn tree in the fence, hoping to be hidden in the boughs. "I'm tired," said the man who was digging the grave. "Here, take your spade." Addressing the big man, "It's your turn." "Fax and troth, it's not my turn," replied he as before. "There's Pat Driver in the tree. Why wouldn't he come down and take his turn?" Pat came down to take the spade, but just then the cocks in the little farmyards and cabins round the abbey began to crow. And the men looked at one another. "We must go," said they. "Well is it for you, Pat Driver, that the cocks crowed, for if they had not, you just had been a bundle into that grave with the corpse." 2 months passed, and Pat had wandered far and wide over the county Donegal. and when he chance arrived at Raffo during a fair, among the crowd that filled the diamond, he came suddenly on the big man. "How are you, Pat Driver?" said he, bending down to look into the tinkerer's little face. "You have the advantage of me, sir, for I haven't the pleasure of knowing you," faltered Pat. "Do you not know me, Pat? When you go back to Inishowen, you'll have a story to tell." And that's the end. Jess says, "Haha, poor Pat, he can't hide worth a damn." Darn. Yes. I'm not sure if that speaks to the sort of otherworldly nature of the people he's hiding from, or the things he's hiding from, or whether it's just that he's crap at hiding. Okay. So we've read a story, we've read a poem about a leprechaun, we've read a story about a variant idea of a leprechaun, where they drink all the wine in your cellar. We've looked at the Darrig, these spirits that haunt Pat. And then now we're going to look at Puca, which is the last full story we're going to read. I think it's really interesting. The Puca is... Well, I will read you again what Yeats says about it, because I think he obviously puts it better than me. But then we're going to read a story called... I believe it's called The Piper and the Puca. And I have to give you a little bit of context on some of the things in it too. But let's read about them in general as a concept. There's still a solitary spirit in Irish myth. So like the Leprechaun, the Darrig, and the Cluricaun, they are all solitary spirits. The Puca seems essentially an animal spirit. Some derived his name from Puck, a he-goat, and speculative person consider him the forefather of Shakespeare's Puck. On solitary mountains among old ruins he lives, grown monstrous with much solitude, and is of the race of the nightmare. In the Emma story called... I won't try. I looked it up how to pronounce it. I heard it several times. I'm not going to embarrass myself or an entire culture trying to say it. Of uncertain authorship. Writes me, Mr. Douglas Hyde. We read that out of a certain hill in Leinster there used to emerge as far as his middle a plump, sleek, terrible steed, and speak in human voice to each person about November Day. And he was accustomed to give intelligent and proper answers to such as consulted him, concerning all that would befall him until the November of next year. And the people used to leave gifts and presents at the hill until the coming of Patrick and the holy clergy, which would have been, that's St. Patrick, which would have been the 5th century. Believe it or not. St. Patrick was a real person, came to Ireland in the 5th century. This tradition appears to be a cognate one, that of Puca. Yes, unless it were merely an off-ishka, or water horse. For these, we are told, were common ones, and used to come out of the water to gallop on the sands and in the field, and people would often go between them and the marge and bridle them, and they would make the finest of horses, if only you could keep them away from the sight of water. But if once they saw a glimpse of water, they would plunge in with their rider and tear him to pieces at the bottom. Which is badass. It being a November spirit, however, it tells in favor of the Puca, for November Day is sacred to the Puca. It is hard to realize that wild, staring phantom grown sleek and civil. He has many shapes. He's now a horse, now an ass, now a bull, now a goat, now an eagle. Like all spirits, he is only half of the world in the world of form. I think that's a really important idea that would help you with a lot of the things that we're reading about here, that last line. Like all spirits, he is only half in the world of form. Okay, which brings us to the Piper and the Puca. So a couple of things. First of all, again, Piper means bagpiper, not Piper. But in this, they are going to talk about a mountain called Crogpatrick. which is a real mountain in Ireland. That is Patrick's, it basically means Patrick's Stack or Patrick's Hill. And it's a mountain. It's a real mountain. They're an island nation, so it's not super tall, but it's tall for Ireland. And people, pretty much since the 5th century, well, okay, that's debatable, but anyways, St. Patrick used to apparently go up this mountain in July, and it was a kind of act of penance. People have carried on that tradition to this day. It has, for the last, and in the time that this was written, a Christian church at the top of the mountain, which is part of the reason. But actually and it would have again been around, in the 90s, they found evidence of what oral tradition did say was there, but they hadn't physically found. They found evidence of a structure seeming to be a church from dating back to the 5th century. So it seems likely that the stories of St. Patrick building a church on the top of this mountain were accurate. The oral traditions supported it, and then physical evidence was found to support that, which is just a nice reminder, by the way, not a thing I talk about often here. But Western traditions tend to be really dismissive of anything that's given in oral culture. They might see it as a way of sort of preserving ideas or morals, but not actually a way of preserving facts about their history. And that's kind of stupid. I know that there is suspicion about passing stories between people as a distortion on it, but oral history is very often well supported when it gets tested. There are obviously exceptions. But it isn't particularly surprising to me that oral tradition said that St. Patrick went up this mountain and there was a church at top, and then they found there was a church at top. So there's a reference in here to that mountain in the trip up. And the main thing you need to know as context, if you care for it, is that it is a recognized symbol of penance to a Christian god. This is called the Piper and the Puca, collected from Douglas Hyde, translated literally from the Irish, I'm not going to try, in the book Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry, edited by W.B. Yeats. In the old times, there was half a fool living in Dunmore, in the county Galway. Although he was excessively fond of music, he was unable to learn more than one tune, and that was the Black Rogue. He used to get a good deal of money from the gentlemen, for they used to get sport out of him. One night the piper was coming home from a house where they'd been a dance, and he half drunk. When he came to a little bridge that was up by his mother's house, he squeezed the pipes on and began playing the Black Rogue. The Pooka came up behind him and flung him up on his back. There were long horns on the Puca, and the piper got a good grip of them, and then he said, "Destruction on you, you nasty beast! Let me home! I have a 10 pence in my pocket for my mother, and she wants snuff." "Never mind your mother," said Puca, "but keep your hold. If you fall, you will break your neck and your pipes." Then the Puca said to him, "Play up for me, Shan van Vacht." "I don't know it," said the piper. "Never mind whether you do or you don't," said the Puca. "Play up and I'll make you know." The piper put wind in his bag, and he played such music as made himself wonder. "Upon my word, you're a fine music master," said the piper then. "But tell me where you're bringing me." "There's a great feast in the house of the Banshee at the top of Cog Patrick tonight," says the Puca. "And I'm for bringing you there to play music, and to take my word, you'll get price for your trouble." "By my word, you'll save me a journey then," said the piper, "for Father William put a journey on Croc Patrick on me, not French, Patrick, because I stole the white gander from him last Martinmas." The Puca rushed across the hill and bogs and rough places. Oh, hey, look at that. It's more spam. Pardon me, folks. One must clean the spam. There we go. The Pooka rushed him across hills and bogs and rough places till he brought him to the top of Patrick. Then the Pooka struck 3 blows with his foot, and a great door opened, and they passed in together into a fine room. The piper saw a golden table in the middle of the room and hundreds of old women sitting around about it. The old woman rose up and said, 100,000 welcomes to you, you Pooka of November. Who is this you have with you? The best piper in Ireland, says the Pooka. One of the old women struck a blow on the ground and a door opened in the side of the wall. And what should the piper see coming out but the white gander which he'd stolen from Father William? By my conscience then, says the piper, myself and my mother ate every taste of that gander, only 1 wing, and I gave that to Moiroo, read Mary, and it's she told the priest I stole his gander. The gander cleaned the table and carried it away, and Pooka said, play up music for these ladies. The piper played up, and the old women began dancing, and they were dancing till they were tired. Then the Pooka said to pay the piper, and every old woman drew out a gold piece and gave it to him. By the tooth of Patrick, said he, I'm as rich as the son of a lord. Come with me, says the Pooka, and I'll bring you home. They went out then just as he was going to ride on the Pooka. The gander came up to him and gave him a new set of pipes. The Pooka was not long until he brought him to Dunmore and threw the piper off at the little bridge. And then he told him to go home and says to him, you have 2 things now that you never had before. You have sense and music. The piper went home, and he knocked at his mother's door, saying, let me in, I'm as rich as a lord. I'm the best piper in Ireland. You're drunk, said the mother. No, indeed, said the piper. I haven't drunk a drop. The mother let him in, and he gave her the gold pieces, and... Wait now, he says, till you hear the music I'll play. He buckled on the pipes, but instead of music came the sound as if all the geese and ganders in Ireland were screeching together. He wakened the neighbors, and they were all mocking him until he put on the old pipes, and then he played melodious music for them. And after that, he told them all he'd gone through that night. The next morning, when his mother went to look at the gold pieces, there was nothing there but the leaves of a plant. The piper went to the priest and told him his story, but the priest would not believe a word from him until he put the pipes on him, and then the screeching of the ganders and geese began again. Leave my sight, you thief, says the priest. But nothing would do the piper till he would put the old pipes on him to show the priest that his story was true. He buckled on the old pipes, and he played melodious music, and from that day till the day of his death, there was never a piper in the county of Galway that was as good as he was. And that is a story of a Pooka. There are other stories of Pookas. Unfortunately, they're very long, so it wouldn't really fit my format here. But there's a story about Puca called Daniel O'Rourke and Kildare Puca, which are both ones I think are worth your time. Which brings me to the last thing I want to do, which is just a description of, there we are, the Banshee. So I'm not reading a story about a Banshee because it is also kind of long and it was getting to be too much to fit in. But I did just want to read the description of it because it's such a, well, I don't know, it's like an inspiring or unique thing. The Banshee. This is from W.B. Yeats, describing his observations and understanding of a certain spirit, a solitary fairy in Ireland. The Banshee, from Ban, a woman, and she, a fairy, so woman fairy. Gia says that Gander got him back. Yes, they did. Is an attendant fairy that follows the old families, and none but them, and wails before a death. Many have seen her as she goes on wailing and clapping her hands, and the keen, the funeral cry of the peasantry, is said to be an imitation of her cry, When more than one banshee is present and they wail and sing in chorus, it is time for the death of some holy or great one. An omen that sometimes accompanies the banshee is the coach-a-bower, an immense black coach mounted by a coffin, drawn by a headless horseman driven by a Dullahan. By a headless horse is driven by a Dullahan. It will go rumbling to your door, and if you open it, according to Croker, a basin of blood will be thrown in your face. Isn't that wild? These headless phantoms are found elsewhere than Ireland. In 1807, 2 of the sentries stationed around St. James Park died of fright. A headless woman, the upper part of her body naked, used to pass through at midnight and scale the railings. After a time, the sentries were stationed no longer at that haunted spot. In Norway, and I found this interesting, the heads of corpses were cut off to make their ghosts feeble. Thus came into existence the Dullahans, perhaps. Unless indeed they are descended from that Irish giant who swam across the channel with his head in his teeth. All right. Those are some of the solitary fairies. I'm sure there are probably better pronunciations of some of that stuff. I did do my homework, but it doesn't mean that I learned, Gaelic overnight. Hopefully you guys enjoyed learning about leprechauns and Irish mythology of these sort of solitary figures. If you're a writer, maybe you can work some of that lore into your stories. And if you're not, I don't know, just don't trust little people you find in the road. That seems to be the theme of all these stories. GS says, oh my god, this is so specific. Yeah, it really gets specific. Well, anyways, this has been Fireside Fairytales, and as you can see, we read stories together. If you prefer to be a part of something more humorous, energetic, or creative, rather than just reading old stuff, join us on Thursdays at 6:30. We do the Varietal show. It's live writing with myself and usually some other people, or sometimes just me. And you bring your ideas, or you throw in ideas that are hard to work into a concept, and we sort of learn about writing together, and I do some crazy writing of my own, and then we end up with a story at the end of the hour. So if that sounds interesting to you, you should join us on Thursdays at 6:30 PST. So if you're in Eastern, it's 9:30, and any other time zone, I have no idea. Anyways, this has been Readings from Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry by W.B. Yeats. We will almost certainly be reading from this book again. We've never actually read the fairy tales in it. There's a whole section on fairy tales. We've only been reading folk tales. So at some point I will do that, probably not too long off. I might do a lot of Irish stuff leading up to St. Patrick's Day. I was kind of playing with that idea. We'll see how it goes. If you want to support us, the best thing to do is to keep watching, subscribing, liking. Those are all things that really, really help us here at the channel. Or you can also go to our website, varietal-literature.ca, where we have a bunch of short stories, poems, and choose your own adventures and nonfiction stories and things like that. There's lots of stuff to read there, stuff from myself, stuff from other writers that I'm friends with, all for free. And there are also opportunities to make donations there if you want to help support us that way, but you don't have to. But please, like and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Varietal_lit. I've been Rory. I'll keep the fire going for you. You have yourself a good sleep. Thank you for coming to my cabin, and have a good night.